Story 1. When the other person never lets you speak. They say what they want, and when you try to respond, they talk over you. Story 2. Constantly presenting statistics in an argument without a way to verify sources or methods can be problematic. Aaron Sorkin's dialogue has influenced many people's perceptions of how arguments function. Story 3. When people argue to justify their bigotry and hatefulness, they often use religion or bad faith arguments as proof, purposefully ignoring hard facts in favor of their feelings. It is frustrating to try to show someone that their hate is unjustified while they choose to ignore the historical and scientific evidence presented to them. Some individuals cling to ignorance as if it were a safety net. Story 4. I was just talking about this oddly niche topic today. Someone who has undergone poor cosmetic surgery loses credibility, in my opinion. My child's teacher has very noticeable filler and Botox, and it makes me think less of her opinions on other matters. How can she not see what she is doing? Story 5. Using beliefs and religion as arguments. I'm sorry, but if your argument starts with, as it's stated in the Bible, I cannot take you seriously. Story 6. I am a lawyer and immediately stop taking the opposing counsel seriously if they mention that their bar number is lower than mine. Bar numbers are assigned in order of admission to the state bar, with a lower number indicating longer tenure. For anyone unaware, this is essentially the professional equivalent of saying, I am older than you, so that makes me right. Story 7. Ad hominem association fallacy and false dichotomies are all argumentative fallacies that you hopefully learned in high school. Story 8. A number of things, appealing to emotion rather than facts. Ad hominem attacks, including labeling someone because they align themselves with a political party or politician. For example, you like Trump, so that means you're a Nazi or Nazi sympathizer. Moving the goalposts or using straw man arguments. Cherry-picking statistics instead of considering the bigger picture. Making large-scale generalizations about someone's affiliations or background, such as, you're from a certain party, so you don't know anything, or you're not a cisgender man, so your opinion on this subject doesn't matter. Ignoring or adopting a position based on the opinion of a celebrity or politician, for instance, well, Trump thinks this, so everything about it is wrong. Additionally, truth bombs or mic drop statements are rarely as powerful as people believe. They often suggest closed-mindedness and an unwillingness to consider a rebuttal from the speaker. Story 9. Racism, quoting religious texts, inserting politics into non-political conversations, insults, repetitive statements, shouting, and a steadfast refusal to address counterarguments. Story 10. An argument that is logically invalid invalidates itself. There is an objective technical reason for calling an argument invalid. Story 11. Bad assumptions and false facts. Most other reasons listed here have no impact on the actual validity of an argument. Story 12. Whenever I hear people repeating things word for word from the news, especially meaningless political phrases, they often have no idea what they mean. When people argue about topics I am knowledgeable in and start with, I am not an expert, but it can be frustrating. I have attended college and worked in the industry for decades, so trust that I am not misleading you for any personal gain. Story 13. I dislike when people say, you can make an argument, as though it's their way of testing a point or intentionally spreading misinformation without personally supporting that argument. Story 14. When they keep telling you to look it up yourself instead of providing facts to support their argument. Story 15. Interrupting with a raised voice is not appropriate. I understand that everyone has something they are passionate about and will defend it, but please do not interrupt while I am speaking. I will listen to your input and you might change my mind, but please be respectful. Story 16. Using personal experience or preferences as a reason for making decisions that affect many different people can lead to unintended consequences. My coworker turned the fridge to the highest setting because he claimed his yogurt kept getting watery. As a result, everyone's lunch ended up frozen. It took weeks for us to figure out that his yogurt was watery because it was expired. Story 17. Not acknowledging a contradiction or even noticing it can lead to confusion. When you have conflicting truths, it is important to challenge them with scrutiny. That's the essence of dialectics. That is a proper argument. Story 18. Canned responses and talking points. I don't mind if you disagree with my beliefs, but the moment I hear you using talking points to make your argument, I know it will lead to nowhere. Story 19. When the facts used for the argument are wrong, there are different opinions and a refusal to accept the truth. Arguments should be based on facts, not misinformation. Story 20. Changing the subject when they can't defend a point or answer a question undermines their argument. Additionally, making claims and asking me to do my own research to validate those claims is frustrating. Lastly, I encounter personal attacks and whataboutism. Story 21. When it's obvious their morality doesn't match my own. An example. A coworker and I were discussing the election, who we were voting for, and our reasons for not voting for the other candidate last October. Many topics were debatable, and people had varying opinions. I expressed that Donald Trump shouldn't be allowed to run for office, citing that he had been found guilty of over 30 crimes. It wasn't a matter of questionable actions in self-defense. His response was simply, "So, a convicted criminal as the leader of this country? Who in their right mind would support that?" He had no defense other than dismissing my concerns. I was taken aback and had to walk away. This coworker was mocking his father's celebratory event for Trump's election victory. Yet he seemed oblivious to the implications. I brought up the issues of revoked visas and deportations, and he tried to argue that it only affected criminals. When I pointed out that wasn't the case, he claimed, "Well, my family hasn't had any problems, despite others having issues with their visas." I realized who I was speaking with and decided to end the conversation. Story 22. I think power scaling is fun, but there have to be limits. For example, people who try to power scale comics might argue that there is a version of the Hulk capable of consuming the entire multiverse and defeating Goku with his left butt cheek because that is where all his power is stored. However, it raises the question, why? You shouldn't be able to use comics or Ice Guy in any debate. Story 23. Ad hominem. When you resort to saying, anyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi, racist, or bigot, it indicates that you lack valid arguments. Story 24. Using the race, sex, and gender card. You're a biased individual. No, I'm critiquing your argument, not your skin color. Story 25. I try to point out logical fallacies in arguments people make on Reddit and hope they will respond with corrected versions of their arguments. However, they usually just resort to insults. Story 26. It drives me incredibly frustrated that people are often more upset by rudeness than by poor arguments. I apologize if this hurts your feelings, but someone being aggressive while making their point does not invalidate it at all. Sometimes, strong emotions are warranted. I don't like it when people are rude either, especially not to me, but sometimes you need to toughen up a bit. Story 27. Appealing to authority fallacies and sarcastic or mocking responses to disagreement. Story 28. What about isms? Especially where I work. Well, so-and-so doesn't do that. It's so much more work. Yeah, well, maybe I'm a better person, worker, or nurse than so-and-so. Sorry, not sorry. Someone else being lazy is not a good enough reason for me to let my patients and surgeons down. So-and-so is going to find out the hard way one day why I go the extra mile. Story 29. When you can't provide an example of your problem, it leads to difficulties. Honorable mention. Interrupting makes it hard for me to express my point. I will simply stop talking. Story 30. A person to whom facts are not persuasive may not be open to accepting a premise, even when citing a source or proving a claim. If that is the case, they likely have no intention of engaging in a good faith debate, and their views cannot be respected. Story 31. Exaggerating the facts to make a non-issue an issue. Additionally, using the word regardless is more appropriate. Story 32. One form of argument that bothers me is an unwillingness to accept analogies or comparisons as what they are. I have seen arguments that go like this. Suppose someone argues that it is acceptable to ignore animal welfare because it is socially accepted, and I respond by saying, in the United States, it was socially accepted to ignore the welfare of minorities and women. That doesn't mean it was right. I am arguing that social acceptance does not determine whether an action is ethical, but I often hear offended responses like, "So, you're seriously comparing minorities to animals?" Story 33. When actual visual evidence is available for free on the internet and intoxicated individuals in charge of defense claim the event did not occur. Story 34. Fallacies are numerous, and my favorite is ad hominem. The most common form is "you're an idiot." No further evidence is provided. They simply believe that whatever they heard on their preferred conservative news outlet is the truth, which should be obvious to everyone else, and they have never taken the time to look beyond that. Story 35. When someone says, "I believe" or "I feel," I don't care about your beliefs or feelings. I only care about the facts. Story 36. Respond to some points but do not acknowledge those you cannot respond to, labeling them as fake news. Arguments often amount to simple denials. Honestly, arguing with anyone seems pointless these days. I have spent years giving myself a headache arguing with numerous misguided individuals, and each time they refuse to accept any information contradicting their established beliefs. Story 37. If they use the phrase "full stop," I find it unnecessary. When they describe something as common sense, I assume they haven't thoroughly examined their opinion or, at best, they don't know how to articulate their beliefs. I believe that if something truly is common sense, it should be easy to justify. Story 38. The moment someone strays off topic and begins insulting the other person's character, I prefer to focus on the facts. I will listen, but as soon as I hear mentions of feelings or insults, it indicates that they no longer wish to engage in the argument. Story 39. Anecdotal evidence without any supporting information is insufficient. While the story shared is sad, it could also be fabricated. Please provide more substantial evidence. A common issue is the dismissal of evidence based on the perceived bias of the source, particularly when it contradicts one's own beliefs. For example, individuals who primarily follow Fox News often refuse to read CNN, and vice versa, believing that the opposing network disseminates false information. Story 40. Confirmation bias is when I realize it's about finding information that aligns with personal beliefs rather than what is accurate or thoroughly investigated. I disengage because it is not worth debating with someone who believes they cannot be wrong. Story 41. As soon as someone uses an ad hominem approach, attacking the messenger or resorting to insults instead of providing a valid response, it's clear to me that they have nothing to contribute. This indicates they may either be a bot or lack the intelligence to engage in a meaningful discussion. Story 42. The tendency to list negative actions taken by the United States in response to criticisms of Russia is a strategy employed by some individuals. They seek to divert attention by challenging one claim while simultaneously presenting multiple others. The objective is to create an environment where meaningful communication becomes difficult, all while attempting to appear more knowledgeable to observers. Story 43. When a manager treats you harshly or seriously while being friendly with others in the department, it can be quite frustrating. Story 44. Never willing to bend on anything, always the contrarian. Only sees things in black and white, incapable of thinking abstractly or seeing the big picture. Story 45. Strawman. When there are more scarecrows than valid points, I disengage. Runner-up, reduction to absurdity. Reducing an argument to its most absurd point. Example. So, you're saying all people should just die then? And that nobody should live? Story 46. Refusing to listen. You don't have to agree. Not listening shows you don't care and only want to hear yourself. Story 47. Making your point more loudly than others does not make you correct. Yelling and talking over people is not the way to communicate effectively. Story 48. Very little based on my interactions. I hear a lot of, "Yes," but then they explain their perspective. But my response is usually, "Despite what you said, my original point remains." Story 49. Not considering any counterarguments. If all you have is the information you've rehearsed or been instructed to say, then you're not thinking, you're just repeating. Story 50. I was told, "You just haven't lived life yet." Sir, we're almost 40. Even privileged people have had life experiences. Story 51. Anecdotes. Your best friend's grandfather's mistress may have seen a ghost. However, stating this is not meaningful evidence and does not merit consideration. Story 52. Telling someone to mind their own business after posting a bigoted rant about Mexicans on a public forum. Story 53. Using opinion-based sources rather than factual sources from a reliable site is not advisable. Someone's opinion does not constitute a fact. Fox News is not a reliable source. The Bible also cannot be used as a factual source. Story 54. When people become rude for no reason or throw insults, it ceases to be about the issue and becomes a way for them to diminish my perspective due to their own insecurities. Alternatively, it may be a bullying tactic to pressure me into agreement. Regardless, when I am engaged in an argument, I strive to remain respectful and avoid making things personal. I believe that no one truly listens when everyone is simply shouting their opinion over one another. Unfortunately, that seems to be the only way some people know how to argue, and I prefer to engage differently. Story 55. Never play chess with a pigeon. They will make a mess all over the board and then strut around as if they have one. Similarly, never argue with an idiot. They will bring you down to their level and overwhelm you with experience. Story 56. When someone uses their religion as justification, I immediately lose interest in what they are about to say. To me, it indicates that they are simply repeating something from a book rather than expressing their own belief. Story 57. Overwhelming influx of logical fallacies. It surprises me that you have no actual points. The biggest issues for me are redirection, quoting authority in a misleading way, and the argument from personal disbelief. For those unaware, redirection is basically shifting the focus. Oh, there is a 24-hour sun in the Antarctic summer? Well, what about an equally nonsensical flat Earth talking point? Quoting authority in a misleading way involves citing someone inaccurately. Sometimes the person has qualifications in the subject and is misquoted or taken out of context. Other times, they are an authority in a different area or not an authority at all. For example, Einstein said plate tectonics can't be true, therefore continental drift. Einstein was a physicist, not a geologist. He should not be cited as an authority on geology and earth science because of this. The argument from personal disbelief is essentially resorting to childish tactics. I can't see how this model could possibly work, therefore it doesn't. They may try to evade the issue, but if you read between the lines, you understand the underlying argument. Just because you cannot see how it works does not mean it doesn't work. Can you tell I watch a lot of debunking content? I suggest Professor Dave for probably all of these, but specifically for redirection and personal disbelief. The flat earth proponents use these tactics frequently. Forrest Valkai's series on misinformation is great for the quoting authority fallacy. From the first episode, he does this thing where he looks up the quote and then reads the rest of the context. Both are great creators. I highly recommend them. Story 58. When a person becomes rude to argue, it clearly shows that they have no valid arguments and resort to disparaging remarks. Story 59. Personal attacks, including name-calling and involving personal feelings too deeply, can undermine a discussion. You can have strong feelings about an argument, but if those feelings lead you to ignore facts or focus excessively on emotion, you cannot think critically. In such cases, the argument has ended. If you resort to personal attacks or name-calling, it signifies the end of a productive discussion as well. Story 60. A lack of research and understanding of multiple peer-reviewed articles and scientific papers, along with the inability to accept an alternative opinion. Story 61. If a man doesn't agree with a woman and she uses the terms involuntary celibate, misogyny, or cannot handle a strong woman. Story 62. When someone brings up fascism or discusses how things result from greed and capitalism, I cannot tolerate listening to ignorance. When someone hints at a conspiracy or talks about them doing things to us, it becomes clear that the person lacks knowledge of history or the subject matter. Story 63. Any appeal to a religious authority, whether a real figure like a pastor or priest, or an unreal concept such as a deity, is unproductive in a discussion. Unless we are specifically discussing the Bible, I do not care what Jesus may or may not have said. Derailing the conversation with statements like, God would want, or as a Christian, does absolutely nothing for your argument except invalidate it. I wish I could be surprised that people still think or argue this way in 2025, but I am not. Story 64. Making parallels with something that has no correlation and does not help their point, other than a very loose connection. Story 65. If they call you wrong but refuse to provide a concrete solution or answer for their position, do not stay on defense during an argument. Instead, make them advocate for their own stance. Story 66. Deflections, excuses, insults, and the God excuse are the last resorts of a person who has no valid position or has completely lost the argument. Story 67. When they start word lawyering, picking at people's words with literal definitions when you clearly know what they meant does not mean you are right. Story 68. A few things that invalidate arguments include excessive emojis, excessive use of capital letters in replies, personal attacks without justification, faulty logic, and leading with a lie. Story 69. Goalpost shifting. I once told someone that Muskie silences Twitter accounts he doesn't agree with, and they asked us to provide a list of those accounts. Someone else provided the list, so they replied with a request for a list of accounts that were not reinstated. Congratulations, you contradicted yourself. Story 70. People who use like excessively and those who say literally when they do not mean it literally. Story 71. Any combination of not to sound like this, but immediately makes you sound like that thing. If you have to tell me you don't mean to sound rude, maybe you sound rude. This is especially true if someone says, not to sound racist, followed by the most outrageous statements. Story 72. People who use the Bible to prove their points often say, well, it says so in the Bible, and that's all the proof I need. They overlook the fact that their holy book contains contradictions, and they tend to cherry-pick the parts they like while ignoring the rest. I enjoy provoking them. They may not know that, even though I am an atheist, I have read their good book from cover to cover, know the names of all the different books by heart, and can quote it chapter and verse. For instance, I might say, ooh, that's really interesting. I'd love to know more. Do you have any sources? Then I wait for references to answers in Genesis, Ken Ham quotes, or other similar material to appear. This usually brings me great amusement. However, if they have been particularly unpleasant, I find that giving them a good rebuttal is satisfying. Story 73. Foul language. If you are not intelligent enough to express yourself without it, you are not worth talking to. Story 74. CNN and the Washington Post. Anyone pro-Democrat right now? The old party is in a downward spiral similar to the Whig Party. Story 75. The argument itself. I do not debate or engage in arguments. I do not waste my time with that. Sharing opinions and beliefs is fine, but trying to persuade someone or argue a point is not something I participate in. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.